Hello and welcome to today's edition of Your Questions Answered with Father Gruner. I'm John Veneri. We take your questions. You send them to us via email. Father Gruner answers them. We talk about them. So continue to send them to us at questions@thefatimacenter.com. We have a question today that has to do with the promises, the 15 promises of the Rosary. And the gentleman asks, are you able to explain what Our Lady means by signal graces?
Well, it's a very simple question, and hopefully we can make it brief. But the first thing is, a signal grace is an unusual grace. It's singular almost. And I'd like to give an example of this. Until I put my miraculous medal on, I wore it for years. I still wear it underneath my clothes. Mm-hmm. But I wore it, but I'm not saying I didn't get any graces for that. Our Lady promises graces for wearing it around your neck. But when I put the scapular on, the miraculous medal on externally, and I can tell you what year it was, 1982. It was shortly after that I started talking about the consecration of Russia. Mm-hmm. And I guess it's a signal grace. I wasn't looking for a signal grace, mm-hmm. but in fact it was on the advice of a confessor that I wore the scapular. It wasn't my idea, it was his idea. But I think that the signal grace was talking about the consecration. Because, at the time, I knew that John Hafford and Hamish Fraser, they're both friends of mine. Mm-hmm. And both were on opposite sides of the question whether the consecration of 1982 on May 13th by Pope John Paul II was the requested consecration of the consecration of Russia. And John Hafford was saying yes, and Hamish Fraser was saying no. So myself, I didn't know. So I read them both. I read them quite at length, and I realized that Hamish was right. I mean, again, as I say, I knew both of them. I knew Hamish since 1968. I knew John Hafford since 1971. Anyway, but the point, what I'm saying is, looking back at it, now it's 32 years since I started this, on this question, and looking back at it, I've said more than once, had I ever known what the trials I was going to get into with this, I would never have started. Mm. But on the other hand, it's not been. I mean, there's been both trials and triumphs, little trials and little triumphs, but along the way. So I mean, looking back, it hasn't been that hard. But looking forward, looking all at once, I would not have started. Yeah. So the point I'm getting though is that it would be I'm not saying it was a signal of grace. God knows, but just like putting on a miraculous medal exteriorly would bring down more graces because you're making that profession of faith and devotion, active devotion to Our Lady. No doubt there are other graces. Sometimes you can't recognize them as what they are,
Well, I think the context too in which he asked it was because I mentioned the 15 promises is the first promise of the Rosary that Our Lady gave to St. Simon Stock. Whosoever shall faithfully serve me by the recitation of the Rosary shall receive signal graces.
Of course, I've been saying the Rosary every day as well. So I mean, it could be all of these combining. But a signal grace then would be something that is not everyone gets. Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's if you see the miraculous medal again, if you look at the rays on her fingers, and there are pictures of it, and she had her hands out like this, and those rays of light coming from her hands signified graces. But the ones that were darker signified graces that people were not asking for. Mm-hmm. And so there's graces Our Lady wants to give that you have to ask for. And if you don't ask for them, she won't give them. Not because God reserves certain graces only to prayer. And of course, He only reserves some graces, not just to your own prayer, your prayer through the intercession of Our Lady. So you have to ask her to ask for you to get these graces. Mm-hmm. So there are certain graces which are reserved to praying the Rosary. And if you don't ask for them, if you don't pray the Rosary, you will never get these graces. You go through life, just like you say, okay, when I'm born, I'm baptized, I go to church, but how is it this other person has all these, I remember some people that, for example, make an act of a sacrifice to not drink or something like that, and yet, you see that their personality almost has been compensated. They're not drunk at all, but they're so joyful that people are attracted to them just because. And yet, what is it? It may well be because they made that sacrifice of promising not to have a drink of alcohol, for example. Mm-hmm. So there's different things. For example, I've noticed that the Latin Rite bishops in Canada and the Ukrainian Rite bishops, now it's not because they're Ukrainian and Latin Rite. The ones, the first language is Ukrainian, the others would be English or French. But there's a difference I see between them. I've noticed this for years. Is that the Ukrainian Catholic bishops, I'm not Ukrainian Catholic, I'm Catholic, they're Catholic, but I'm not of the Byzantine rite, I'm not a Ukrainian Catholic. But I see the Catholic bishops, Ukrainian Catholic bishops are often more intelligent than the Latin rite bishops. And it's not because they're more intelligent, but we're talking about things of the faith, because the Ukrainian Catholic bishops have insisted that their faithful continue to fast, abstain from meat on Fridays during the whole year. And there's a grace certainly given to the person who does it, but there's also a grace given to the bishops for upholding that. And some of the graces of the faithful have won for the bishops to be better bishops because they're making that act of corporate, public sacrifice. And so there's graces that people are understood grace much more than we do today. I mean, there's not that we can understand it completely, but there are graces that we can do things with ease that we can't do without grace. And there's things that we can't do at all without grace, but there are things we can do with great difficulty. When you have a signal grace, you can do things a lot easier. And so what looks like a tremendous burden to some people, if he's got these signal graces, although he's carrying the same weight, it's not the same burden. Okay, and so certainly it's a great thing to have signal graces by praying the rosary every day, and by wearing the miraculous medal exteriorly, and by doing other things prayer is talking to God and to the saints, but the saints talk to us too. Now, sometimes they talk to us through such as these 15 promises. Our Lady appears to St. Dominic, gives these 15 promises, and says, this is what you're going to get. If you can preach this, you can tell other people, if you pray the rosary, I'm going to give signal graces which are unique to those persons, but would make their life burden easier, or their merits greater in heaven, or they're securing their salvation more securely than before. Whatever, and I can't. There must be thousands of signal graces. So it's. I hope that explains it a little bit.
Yeah. So the Rosary gives us this and much more, and that's why we pray the Rosary every day and pray it with the families. We pray the family Rosary and try to all the time, and I think it's right that the family that prays together stays together.
I think that it's been true. I mean, Father Peyton made that as a motto, but it wasn't that he expressed it. But I think that there's a grace for the family that prays together. Then God gives them the grace to tolerate each other's faults and to help each other along the way to become better and so forth.
Yes, because what you've introduced is a kind of an added principle of unity, which is Our Lady.
Yes.
You brought Our Lady in to be the unifier and the mother of the family, and that too will give the family tremendous graces. And there's stories too of people that once that broke down, then the practice of the faith started to break down. Oftentimes there's a very direct connection.
Yes.
So the Rosary is important, the family Rosary is important, and that's all for today. We will see you on the next program.